In this video, I'll be repairing my in-laws' rocking chair. Specifically, this chair has a couple of broken tenons, and the mortises have a lot of old glue that needs to be cleaned out. The chair shows evidence of someone attempting repairs in the past, which didn't take particularly well. Have any tips on chair repair? Leave them in the comment section. Stick around until the end of the video to see the fixed chair. I'll start by disassembling any loose joints so that they can be properly glued back together. I then use a chisel to scrape off any leftover glue residue. Several of the holes have leftover polyurethane glue in them, which is easy to drill out. I also use the drill bit like a reamer to get the glue off the sides of the mortise. Since these spindles are pretty thin, I thought that the best way to add back material for a new tenon was to cut a long scarf joint and splice in another piece of wood. To do this, I first cut the slat on the miter saw, using a clamp to hold it safely in place. I found a suitable piece of wood of the same species, in this case red oak, and cut a matching angle on this, trying to match the grain as well as I could. To make things easier to handle, I cut this piece from the larger board. When gluing this up, I thought I might have to apply pressure along the length of the slat to keep the joint from sliding apart, hence my use of the wooden clamps here. I would have used these as anchor points for clamps to pull along the axis of the slat. As it was, a single clamp at the scarf joint was enough to keep things in place. Next, I use sandpaper to clean off the tenons on the other slats, which removes any residue from old glue and finishes. This ensures a good glue bond later on. The tenon on this upright piece also needs to be repaired, but removing it from the chair wasn't necessary. Instead of trying to find a way to hold this steady in the miter saw, I clamped it to my workbench and made the same cut using a handsaw. I then transferred the angle to another scrap piece and cut this angle with the miter saw. Next was to glue the scrap piece to the broken upright. One of the mortises had the broken tenon still in it, so I drilled this out with a brad point bit slightly smaller than the diameter of the mortise. To clean the mortises of old glue, I find these pipe cleaning brushes very handy. These are typically used to clean copper pipe prior to soldering, and the stiff wire really does a good job in the mortises. With the mortises all cleaned, I took the time to glue in 2 of the intact slats. Now that the glue's dried on the scarf joints, it's time to cut them to length and shape them. To find the length of the upright, I clamped a level to the intact one and used it as a reference for the repaired one. Similar for the broken slat, I used a matching one to measure the required length. I used a flexible ruler to mark out rough cut lines for the tenons. I apparently misplaced the footage, but I used the bandsaw to cut this out. A spoke shave is used to roughly trim the tenon. I again used another slat to mark the length of the tenon and also measured the diameter. I found it safest to use a file to sneak up on the proper tenon size, checking it against its mating mortise as I went. With the tenon at final size, I used the spoke shave again to do the final shaping of the slat. I follow the same processes for the broken upright. To make things go quicker, I used the cabinet maker's rasp to shape the tenon to a square of the same dimensions as the mortise, and then filed that round to the correct diameter. A dry fit before glue up is a good idea to make sure that everything fits. Before finishing, it's a good idea to mask the tenon off to prevent stain or varnish from getting on it, which would weaken the glue bond considerably. Matching existing finishes is more of an art than science, and I'm not expert on it enough to speak to it. I checked my finishing procedure with the scrap piece to see if I could get a close enough match to the existing finish on the chair with what I had on hand. This chair already has a pretty worn patina, so a little mismatch here isn't going to hurt anything. For a top coat, I used a satin water-based polyurethane, which had a sheen similar to the existing top coat. Using a rag allowed me to blend the two finishes a bit better than using a brush. I applied 3 coats per the manufacturer's recommendation. After the finish cured, I removed the masking tape on the tenons. I applied glue to the mortises and the tenons using an acid brush, but one where I trimmed the bristles down to about a 1/4 inch. These types of brushes make applying glue where you want it much easier. Don't be stingy with the glue here. It's easy enough to wipe up the excess, and a glue-starved joint is no good in a chair. With the back of the chair glued in, I clamped it up and left it overnight to dry. I forget how comfortable a good rocking chair is. I can see why my in-laws kept it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more.